Clara vanished without a trace in 1962, leaving behind only whispers and speculation that haunted her small town for a decade. The truth remained buried beneath layers of secrets and lies until 1972, when it finally emerged from the shadows, more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The summer of 1962 hung heavy over São Paulo, the air thick with humidity that seemed to seep through the hospital walls. St. Catherine's Medical Center stood as a beacon of hope amid the bustling city, its corridors alive with the rhythmic clatter of nurses, white shoes against linoleum floors. The antiseptic smell mingled with the scent of fresh flowers brought by visitors, creating that distinct hospital atmosphere that was both comforting and unsettling. 5-year-old Clara Martinez clutched her teddy bear, a worn, caramel-colored companion she'd named Senor Mel, as she was wheeled through the corridors, her golden hair, usually bouncing with the same energy as her personality, lay flat against the starched white pillow. Her normally bright blue eyes were dulled with pain, occasionally squeezing shut when the sharp stabbing in her belly became too much to bear. "It's just appendicitis," Dr. Wilson had assured Ana and Roberto Martinez in the waiting room. "Very common in children her age. Nothing to worry about." His confident smile had momentarily eased their fears, though Ana couldn't help but notice how understaffed the pediatric ward seemed. Nurses rushed between rooms, their faces etched with the fatigue of too many patients and too few hands. "We'll need you to fill out these admission forms," a harried nurse told them, thrusting a clipboard into Roberto's hands. "The billing office is down the hall to the left." Ana hesitated, looking back at Clara's room. Should one of us stay with her?" "She'll be fine," the nurse assured them, already moving toward another patient. "We're preparing her for examination. It'll just take a few minutes." Roberto squeezed Ana's hand. "Come on, querida. The sooner we finish the paperwork, the sooner we can get back to her." The billing office was crowded, the line moving at a glacial pace. What should have taken minutes stretched to nearly half an hour as a clerk meticulously verified their insurance information. Ana felt a growing unease, checking her watch repeatedly until Roberto finally said, "Let's go back. We can finish this later." They hurried through the corridors, the hospital suddenly seeming larger, more labyrinthine than before. When they reached Clara's room, Ana's heart stopped. The bed was empty, the sheets rumpled and thrown back as if in haste. Senor Mel lay abandoned on the wrinkled linen, one button eye staring accusingly at the ceiling. "Clara!" Ana called, her voice barely a whisper before rising to a shout. "Clara!" Roberto pushed past her into the bathroom, finding it empty. The IV stand remained beside the bed, the saline solution still dripping steadily into nothing. Senor Mel lay alone on the bed, the only witness to whatever had transpired in those precious minutes they were gone. Ana's scream tore through the hospital corridor like a siren, shattering the sterile quiet that had settled over the ward. The sound, raw and primal, echoed off the mint-green walls, drawing medical staff from every direction. Doctors abandoned their clipboards, nurses left medication carts unattended, and even patients peered curiously from their doorways as Ana's desperate cry continued. "My daughter is gone! Clara is gone!" she sobbed, clutching the abandoned teddy bear to her chest. Roberto stood frozen beside the empty bed, his face drained of color, fingers trembling as they traced the rumpled sheets where their 5-year-old had been resting just minutes earlier. The head nurse, a stern woman named Margaret with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun, immediately took charge. "Lock down all exits," she ordered a young orderly who stood gaping at the doorway. "And no one leaves this floor without being checked." Panic rippled through the staff as the reality sank in. A child had vanished under their watch. The hospital erupted into controlled chaos. Doctors who moments ago had been discussing diagnoses now formed search parties, methodically checking each room, closet, and corridor. Nurses called out Clara's name, their voices bouncing off the tiled floors, returning only hollow echoes. Every second felt stretched to breaking point. Aina watched the clock on the wall, its hands moving with excruciating slowness. 5 minutes, 10, 15. Each tick seemed to whisper accusations. You left her alone. You trusted strangers. You failed to protect her. She was just here. Roberto kept repeating, his voice growing hoarser. We were gone for 7 minutes. 7 minutes to fill out insurance forms. The search expanded outward like ripples in a pond. Staff checked under beds, inside linen carts. Behind curtains, they scoured the cafeteria, the chapel, the basement storage rooms. 2 orderlies even climbed to the rooftop, calling Clara's name into the humid summer air. By nightfall, the frantic energy had given way to something more ominous. Police officers arrived, their faces grave as they took statements and examined the room. They spoke in hushed tones about protocols and procedures, words that meant nothing to parents whose world had just collapsed. It's as if she simply evaporated, one detective muttered, scratching notes into a small pad. No signs of struggle, no witnesses, nothing on the visitor logs. Anna clutched the teddy bear tighter, its worn fur damp with her tears. The bear, Clara's constant companion since infancy, was the only proof that her daughter hadn't been a dream, that somewhere in this labyrinth of antiseptic hallways and fluorescent lights, her little girl was waiting to be found. News of little Clara's disappearance rippled through St. Mary's Hospital like wildfire. By nightfall, every nurse, orderly and patient had heard about the golden-haired 5-year-old who had vanished without a trace. Within days, the whispers reached beyond the hospital walls, seeping into the quiet streets of their suburban neighborhood. Neighbors gathered in hushed circles on front porches, exchanging theories that grew more elaborate with each retelling. I heard one of the night nurses was caught stealing medication last month, Mrs. Patterson told the other mothers at the playground. Who knows what else they're capable of? Others painted darker scenarios. Children have been going missing all over the country, Mr. Donovan insisted over his garden fence. There are people who pay good money for healthy kids. God knows where that poor child is now. The hospital administration maintained a united front of concerned professionalism, but their carefully worded statements only fueled suspicion. The head doctor spoke of unfortunate circumstances and ongoing investigations, while refusing to address specific questions about security protocols or staff whereabouts during Clara's disappearance. When Sarah and Thomas finally contacted the police, they expected swift action. Instead, they found themselves trapped in an endless maze of paperwork and indifference. Detective Miller, a weathered man with perpetually loosened tie, took their statement with mechanical precision but little urgency. We'll do what we can, he said, closing his notepad before they'd finished speaking. But I should warn you, children go missing every day. Most turn up on their own. Days stretched into weeks. The police interviews were perfunctory at best. Hospital staff provided contradictory accounts of that afternoon, and crucial visitor logs mysteriously ended just before Clara disappeared. When Thomas demanded to see security footage, he was informed that the cameras had been undergoing maintenance that day. This is how they operate, whispered a sympathetic nurse who cornered Sarah in the hospital parking lot. They're more worried about lawsuits than finding your daughter. The bureaucracy of 1962, America seemed designed to obstruct rather than assist. Forms were filed incorrectly, reports were misplaced, and jurisdiction disputes between local and state authorities left the case suspended in administrative limbo. Each passing day dimmed the chances of finding Clara, a fact that the authorities acknowledged with clinical detachment, but that Sarah and Thomas refused to accept. The system isn't built for people like us, Thomas said bitterly after another fruitless meeting with police officials. We're on our own. Sarah clutched Clara's teddy bear tighter, its worn fur damp with her tears. Then we'll find her ourselves, she whispered. Whatever it takes. Anna and Roberto refused to surrender to despair. Every morning, they woke with the same determination burning in their hearts, to find their daughter, no matter the cost. They transformed their modest apartment into a makeshift command center, walls covered with maps of São Paulo, marked with red pins indicating every place they'd searched. She's out there somewhere, Roberto would whisper, his voice hoarse from calling Clara's name through the streets. Oh, someone must have seen something. They spent their savings on thousands of flyers bearing Clara's photograph, her golden curls and gap-toothed smile frozen in time. Before dawn, they would paste these images on telephone poles, bus stops, and storefront windows across the sprawling city. Rain would tear them down. They would replace them the next day. The orphanages became their weekly pilgrimage. Anna would clutch Clara's teddy bear as they walked through rows of children's beds, her eyes scanning each small face with desperate hope. The nuns and administrators grew weary of their visits, their pitying glances eventually hardening into annoyance. "We've already told you she isn't here," one director said, blocking the doorway. "Please, you're upsetting the children." Government officials were no more helpful. Roberto would wait for hours in stuffy waiting rooms, only to be dismissed with vague promises and incomplete paperwork. One police sergeant finally snapped, "There are hundreds of missing children in this city. What makes yours so special?" The question haunted them both. They chased every whisper and rumor. When a street vendor claimed to have seen a child matching Clara's description near the Central Market, they spent 3 days searching the area. When an anonymous caller mentioned a blonde girl at a countryside farm, Roberto borrowed a neighbor's car and drove 200 miles. Returning with hollow eyes and empty hands, their home transformed with each passing month. Clara's bedroom remained untouched, her small dress still laid out for the next day that never came, her picture books gathering dust on the nightstand. Anna would sometimes sit on the tiny bed, holding Clara's nightgown to her face, trying to catch the fading scent of her daughter. Birthdays were the hardest. For Clara's 6th, Ina baked a chocolate cake, Clara's favorite, and they sang to an empty chair. By her 7th, they could only manage to light a candle in silence. Christmas mornings, once filled with excited footsteps and delighted squeals, now passed in suffocating quiet. "Sometime," Anna confessed one night, staring at the ceiling, "I think I hear her laughing in the hallway." Roberto reached for her hand in the darkness. "I know," he whispered. "I hear it too." Roberto's life became consumed by his daughter's disappearance. What began as desperate searching transformed into methodical obsession. He converted their small home office into what Anna called the investigation room, its walls plastered with hospital floor plans, staff schedules and timelines. The dining table disappeared beneath stacks of newspapers and police reports he'd managed to obtain through increasingly desperate means. "Someone knows something," he would mutter, red-eyed from another sleepless night. "Someone must have seen her." He purchased a leather-bound notebook that never left his side. In it, Roberto documented every conversation, every hunch, every fleeting rumor about missing children. His handwriting, once elegant, grew cramped and urgent as pages filled with names, dates, and possible connections. He developed a complex system of symbols and abbreviations only he understood. Circles for suspicious accounts, stars for promising leads, question marks for inconsistencies that kept him awake. Hospital staff learned to dread his visits. Roberto would appear weekly, then daily, cornering nurses during breaks, questioning janitors in hallways, and scrutinizing visitors in waiting rooms. Some pitied him, others avoided his desperate gaze. Security eventually restricted his access. But Roberto simply found new ways in, bringing flowers to patients, volunteering briefly in the cafeteria, befriending the night watchman. "You're killing yourself," Anna told him one night, finding him asleep at his desk, cheek pressed against a map marked with red pins. Clara wouldn't want this. But Roberto couldn't stop. The investigation had become his lifeline to their daughter. To abandon it felt like abandoning her, while Roberto chased tangible evidence. Inna sought answers in the mystical. She visited every fortune-teller in São Paulo, from elegant parlors downtown to makeshift booths in crowded markets. She carried Clara's hairbrush and favorite dress to psychics who promised connections to the beyond. Each session followed a familiar pattern: hopeful anticipation, cryptic messages, momentary belief, then crushing disappointment. "She's surrounded by white," one medium whispered, eyes closed in theatrical concentration. "And I see water, or perhaps walls. She's not suffering." Anna clung to these vague pronouncements, interpreting them 1,000 different ways. She burned candles, learned to read tarot cards, and whispered prayers to saints whose names she'd never known before. The incense that filled their home couldn't mask the scent of desperation. Their approaches couldn't have been more different. His rationale, hers spiritual, yet both were fueled by the same relentless hope. In their separate quests, they were drifting further apart, connected only by the ghost of their missing daughter and the teddy bear that still waited on her empty bed. The weight of Clara's absence transformed their marriage in ways neither Anna nor Roberto had anticipated. What began as a unified front against an unimaginable tragedy gradually eroded into separate islands of grief. They still shared meals and a bed, but conversations grew sparse, punctuated by long silences where each retreated into private memories of their daughter. "You should have watched her more carefully," Roberto muttered one evening, the accusation slipping out after months of bottling his thoughts. Anna's face crumpled, but she didn't cry. Her tears had dried up months ago. "And you should have stayed with us instead of running off to fill out those stupid forms," she countered, the bitterness in her voice matching his own. Their friends noticed the change. Dinner invitations were declined, then eventually stopped coming. Neighbors who once brought casseroles and offered shoulders to cry on now crossed the street to avoid uncomfortable encounters. No one knew what to say anymore. Any news about Clara felt cruel after the first year, and empty platitudes like "time heals all wounds" rang hollow in the face of their endless vigil. The whispers started in their neighborhood, and then spread throughout their social circles. Some blamed Anna for leaving Clara alone, even for a moment. Others questioned Roberto's delayed reaction to her disappearance. The most vicious rumors suggested they might have been involved somehow, perhaps covering up an accident or, worse, deliberate harm. "Did you hear they're investigating the father again?" Mrs. Oliveira whispered to her husband one Sunday after church, not realizing Anna was within earshot. "It'd be something about gambling debts and selling the poor child to pay them off." Other theories circulated with equal cruelty. Some claimed Clara had been taken by a childless nurse. Others whispered about trafficking rings that targeted hospitals, stealing children to sell abroad. Each new rumor reached Anna and Roberto like a fresh wound, reopening their grief just as the edges had begun to scab over. They became pariahs in their own community, living embodiments of every parent's worst nightmare. People averted their eyes as if misfortune might be contagious. Even Anna's sister, once so supportive, began making excuses to shorten her visits. Uncomfortable with the shrine-like quality their home had taken on, with Clara's toys untouched and her clothes still hanging in the closet. "We only have each other now," Roberto said one night. Reaching for Anna's hand across the kitchen table, she let him take it, but her fingers remained limp in his grasp. They were together in their isolation, bound by a shared tragedy that simultaneously connected and separated them. Two survivors of the same shipwreck, clinging to different pieces of floating debris. The months after Clara's disappearance blurred into years. Each passing season dulled the urgency of the investigation, until one Tuesday morning, a manila envelope arrived at Anna and Roberto's home. Inside was a brief letter from the police department, clinical in its detachment, informing them that Clara's case was being officially classified as inactive due to insufficient leads and the passage of time. The file number at the top of the page reduced their daughter to a statistic, one of dozens of children who vanished each year in Brazil's sprawling bureaucratic maze. Roberto slammed his fist against the wall when he read it, leaving a dent that would remain unfixed for years, while Anna silently folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer already overflowing with newspaper clippings and false leads. The system had given up on Clara, but they couldn't afford that luxury. Their once vibrant social life withered completely. Friends who had initially brought casseroles and offered shoulders to cry on gradually stopped calling. The awkward silences and pitying glances became too much to bear for everyone involved. Anna and Roberto retreated further into their private grief, a language only they could understand. On each anniversary of Clara's disappearance, they established a ritual. They would clean her room meticulously, though no dust had settled since the previous year's cleaning. Anna would arrange 5 white candles, one for each year of Clara's life, in a circle around her photograph. Roberto would bring fresh sunflowers, Clara's favorite. They would sit on her small bed, the mattress still indented with the shape of her tiny body, and speak to her as if she might hear them somewhere. "We're still looking for you, Mina querida," Anna would whisper, her voice cracking. "We won't stop until you're home." Roberto would tell stories about their day, about changes in the neighborhood, about how her favorite ice cream shop still made that strawberry flavor she loved. They pretended she was growing up somewhere, reaching milestones they could only imagine. The teddy bear, threadbare now from Anna's constant handling, remained precisely where Clara had left it, propped against her pillow. Its glass eyes reflected the candlelight during these vigils, sometimes giving Anna the unsettling impression that it was trying to communicate something. On particularly difficult nights, she would press it to her chest, breathing in the fading scent of her daughter, wondering if somewhere Clara missed it, or if she even remembered it at all. As their 5th annual vigil approached, then their 6th and 7th, the outside world forgot about Clara entirely. But within the walls of their home, time stood perfectly still, frozen on that humid summer day in 1962 when their world collapsed. The hospital had changed in the 5 years since Clara vanished. But Roberto's determination hadn't. He walked the same corridors every few months, his footsteps echoing against walls that had been repainted twice since his daughter disappeared. The staff knew him by name now. Some avoided eye contact. Others offered sympathetic smiles that did nothing to fill the void in his chest. Today, he carried a worn leather notebook, its pages filled with meticulous notes, newspaper clippings, and contradictions he'd uncovered. The hospital administration had grown weary of his visits, but Roberto had become skilled at finding the cracks in their resistance. Missing visitor logs from the week of Clara's disappearance, patient transfer forms with forged signatures, staff schedules that had been altered after the fact. "The system isn't just broken," he told Anna one night, his voice hollow as he spread his notes across their kitchen table. "It's as if someone wanted it to fail." On this particular evening, Roberto found himself in the basement cafeteria, where the oldest employees took their breaks. He spotted Manuel, a janitor who'd been due to retire the year Clara disappeared, but had stayed on, pushing his mop through the hospital's maze of corridors for 5 more years. "I remember that day," Manuel said, his weathered hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug. And not because of what happened. I didn't know about your girl until later, but because of that woman." Roberto's heart quickened. "What woman?" "She wasn't staff, wasn't family to any patient I knew, but she was there 3 days straight before your daughter went missing." Manuel's eyes narrowed with the effort of remembering, always lingering near the children's ward, always watching. "Did you report this?" Roberto asked, pen poised over his notebook. Manuel shook his head. Back then, security wasn't like now. People came and went, but I remember her because she seemed out of place, nervous-like. Her face, would you recognize her? Not clearly, no. She kept to herself, stayed in the shadows. But she always wore this scarf, faded blue with little yellow flowers, tied it under her chin, old-fashioned way. Roberto wrote frantically, his hand trembling. For years, the investigation had focused on hospital staff, on possible negligence. But a stranger, someone deliberately lurking near his daughter's room, this was different. This was intent. Anything else? Roberto pressed. Anything at all. Manuel hesitated. She was carrying something once, a paper bag from the pharmacy down the street, and she was talking to herself like she was practicing what to say. For the first time in years, Roberto felt the cold certainty that Clara hadn't simply wandered off. Someone had taken her, someone who had planned it, someone who might still have her. Roberto clutched the janitor's statement in his trembling hands as he marched into the police station. The paper was creased from countless readings, the words practically memorized. A mysterious woman with a faded scarf lurking near Clara's room in the days before she vanished. After 10 years of emptiness, this fragile thread felt like salvation. Officer Daniels, please, he insisted to the desk sergeant. This is critical information about my daughter's case. When Daniels finally appeared, his expression betrayed his thoughts before he spoke a word. The detective's eyes, heavy with the weight of too many unsolved cases, scanned the paper with practiced indifference. Mr. Thompson, he sighed, handing back the statement. This janitor is 78 years old now. He's describing something he may have seen a decade ago, with no details that could lead to identification. A woman with a scarf in a hospital, that could be anyone, a visitor, a patient's relative. But he never mentioned this before, Roberto protested, his voice rising. Why would he remember it now if it wasn't important? Daniels leaned forward, his voice softening with practiced sympathy. Memory doesn't work that way. People confuse timelines, merge different events. After 10 years, witness testimony becomes increasingly unreliable. The detective's dismissal felt like a physical blow. Roberto stood motionless as Daniels returned to his desk, the case file remaining firmly closed. Outside the station, rain began to fall, matching Roberto's darkening mood, but as water soaked through his jacket, something hardened within him. If the police wouldn't help, he would find this woman himself. The next morning, Roberto began his search. He created crude sketches based on the janitor's description. A woman in her 40s, thin-faced, always wearing a faded blue scarf. He visited women's shelters, showing the drawing to anyone who would look. He haunted hospital waiting rooms, studying faces, searching for something familiar in the eyes of strangers. Most people regarded him with pity or suspicion. Some security guards asked him to leave, but Roberto persisted, driven by the desperate hope that had sustained him for 10 years. At night, he would return home to Anna, his clothes damp from rain or sweat, his voice hoarse from asking the same questions over and over. She would listen silently as he recounted each disappointing encounter, her eyes fixed on Clara's teddy bear. Tomorrow, he would whisper, collapsing into bed. Tomorrow might be different. Anna never contradicted him, but the distance between them grew with each passing day. While Roberto chased shadows across the city, she retreated further into her private world of psychics and prayers, two different paths leading toward the same impossible destination. While Roberto pursued every lead with desperate determination, Anna retreated into a world of her own making. Their home, once filled with laughter and warmth, had become a shrine to absence. Anna spent countless hours in Clara's untouched bedroom. The yellow wallpaper faded, but still decorated with dancing animals. She would sit on the small bed, surrounded by dusty toys and books that had remained unopened for years. staring at photographs spread across the quilt. "You would be 15 now," she whispered to a picture of 5-year-old Clara at the beach, her golden curls dancing in the wind. "You'd probably hate these pigtails now." Her fingers trembled as they traced the outline of her daughter's face. The teddy bear, Clara's beloved Señor Abrazo, sat propped against the pillow, its once plush fur matted and worn from years of Anna's desperate embraces. Anna spoke to the bear as if it were a conduit to Clara herself. "I saw a girl today who had your smile," she told it, straightening its crooked bow tie. "She was buying ice cream with her mother." Sometimes she would read bedtime stories aloud, her voice breaking when she reached Clara's favorite parts. The 10th anniversary of Clara's disappearance approached like a gathering storm. Roberto and Anna moved through their home like ghosts passing through different dimensions, rarely connecting. When they did speak, their conversations were practical, hollow, discussions about bills or groceries that carefully avoided the gaping wound at the center of their lives. Their marriage, once the envy of friends, had crumbled into something unrecognizable. Love remained, buried beneath layers of shared tragedy, but it had transformed into something painful, a reminder of everything they'd lost. Dinner times were marked by the scraping of forks against plates and the ticking of the kitchen clock. The silence between them grew heavier each day. "You're never home anymore," Anna said one evening, her voice flat as Roberto prepared to leave again. "What's the point? It's been 10 years. "I can't stop," he replied, not meeting her eyes. "If I stop, it means I've given up on her. And I haven't," Anna's voice cracked, "because I don't chase shadows across the city." The accusation hung between them, neither willing to bridge the gap. Blame had become their shared language, Roberto silently faulting Anna for leaving Clara alone that day, Anna resenting Roberto's obsession that left her to grieve in solitude. Friends had stopped calling years ago, uncomfortable with grief that refused to follow the proper timeline. Relatives visited only on holidays, their pitying glances and awkward conversations more painful than helpful. In their isolation, Anna and Roberto had become strangers who shared nothing but loss and a teddy bear that held all their broken hopes. 10 years had passed like a cruel dream. The summer of 1972 arrived with an oppressive weight, marking a full decade since Clara had vanished from that hospital bed, leaving nothing but her teddy bear behind. The anniversary loomed over Anna and Roberto like a shadow, darker and more substantial than in previous years. Something felt different this time. Anna noticed it first, a peculiar electricity in the air, a shift in the atmosphere of their grief-hollowed home. "Do you feel it?" she asked Roberto one evening, her fingers absently tracing the worn photograph of their daughter. "Like something's about to happen?" Roberto nodded, understanding without explanation. After 10 years of dead ends and false hopes, his investigation had become mechanical, a ritual performed out of devotion rather than expectation. His hair had grayed prematurely, deep lines etching his once youthful face. The neighbors called him the Ghost as he wandered the streets with his notebook, still asking the same questions after all these years, but fate, it seemed, had not entirely abandoned them. On a sweltering Tuesday, Roberto visited a retirement home on the outskirts of São Paulo, his 27th such visit that month. The facility was understaffed and smelled of disinfectant and forgotten lives. He was about to leave when an elderly nurse named Cecilia stopped him in the corridor. "You're the man looking for the missing girl," she said, not a question but a statement. Her eyes, clouded with cataracts but sharp with memory, studied his face. "I've seen your picture in the papers all these years." Roberto nodded, too exhausted to feel hope. "There was a woman," Cecilia continued, lowering her voice, "a patient at Santa Maria Hospital back in '62. Her name was Elsa Cardoso." Roberto's hand trembled as he wrote the name in his worn notebook. "What about her?" "She lost a child, a little girl, about 5 years old. Tuberculosis took her just weeks before your Clara disappeared." Cecilia's gnarled fingers gripped Roberto's wrist with surprising strength. Elsa was unstable. The grief broke something in her mind. She was released from the psychiatric ward around the same time your daughter went missing. The pen slipped from Roberto's fingers, clattering against the linoleum floor. 1,000 fragmented thoughts collided in his mind. The missing visitor logs, the janitor's description of a woman in a faded scarf, the inexplicable absence of hospital security records. "Do you know where she is now?" he whispered, afraid to speak louder, lest this fragile thread of possibility snap. Cecilia nodded slowly. "Last I heard, she was living in a cottage near Guarulhos, alone, or so everyone thought." Roberto rushed home, his heart pounding with a terrible mixture of dread and hope. For the first time in 10 years, he and Anna faced the possibility that the silence surrounding Clara's disappearance might finally be broken. The nurse's weathered hands trembled slightly as she recounted her memories to Roberto. "Elsa Winters," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Poor woman lost her 5-year-old daughter to pneumonia just days before your Clara vanished." The connection sent chills down Roberto's spine as the nurse continued. "She was a patient herself, severe depression. I remember how she would wander the pediatric ward at night, watching the children sleep." Roberto scribbled frantically in his notebook, his heart pounding. The timing was perfect, too perfect to be coincidence. Elsa had been released from psychiatric observation the very day after Clara disappeared. No one had made the connection then. The hospital's disorganized records had buried this crucial detail for 10 long years. "She wasn't well when they discharged her," the nurse added, shaking her head. "But beds were scarce, and her sister promised to care for her. I always wondered what became of her." Armed with Elsa's full name and her sister's address from the dusty hospital archives, Roberto approached the police once more. This time, Detective Morales, a younger, more determined officer than those who had originally dismissed the case, listened carefully. The circumstantial evidence was compelling enough to reopen the investigation. "And I can't promise anything," Morales warned, as they drove through the outskirts of the city, following leads to Elsa's last known whereabouts. "But this is the strongest lead we've had in years." 3 days of searching led them down forgotten country roads to a cottage so overgrown it seemed part of the forest itself. Tangled vines crawled up crumbling walls, and the tin roof sagged precariously. A narrow footpath, barely visible among the weeds, suggested someone still used the dwelling. "Stay behind me," Morales instructed, hand hovering near his holster as they approached. Roberto's heart hammered against his ribs, each step bringing him closer to what might be the answer to 10 years of agonizing questions. The windows were covered with newspaper and cloth from the inside, allowing only thin slivers of light to escape. Roberto noticed a small garden plot on one side. Someone was growing vegetables here. Living in this forgotten place. Morales knocked firmly on the weathered door. Silence followed, then the faint sound of movement inside. Roberto held his breath, his mind racing with possibilities. Could Clara really be here, after all this time? He thought of Anna waiting by the phone at home, clinging to the teddy bear, afraid to hope, yet unable to stop herself. The door creaked open just an inch, revealing nothing but darkness within. Roberto felt the weight of a decade of searching bearing down on this single moment as Morales identified himself and pushed the door wider. The air in the cottage hung thick with dust, each mote visible in the thin shafts of light that forced their way through grimy windows. Roberto stepped cautiously over the threshold, his heart hammering against his ribs. Police officers flanked him, their hands hovering near their holsters, unsure what they might find after a decade of searching. The floorboards creaked beneath their weight, announcing their presence to the silent dwelling. Years of neglect had transformed what might once have been a cozy home into something that resembled an abandoned museum. Faded photographs on walls, newspapers yellowed with age, dishes still sitting unwashed as if time had simply stopped. "Hello?" Roberto called, his voice cracking. "Is anyone here?" A soft, rustling sound drew their attention to a narrow hallway. The lead officer motioned for Roberto to stay back, but he couldn't, not when he'd come this far. They moved toward a door at the end of the corridor, partially ajar, a sliver of movement visible within. The officer pushed the door open slowly, revealing a small bedroom bathed in the amber glow of an old lamp. Roberto's breath caught in his throat. There, perched on the edge of a narrow bed, sat a thin teenage girl with long, unkempt hair. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. But what made Roberto's knees buckle was the object clutched tightly in her arms, a worn teddy bear with one eye missing and stuffing poking through frayed seams. Clara's bear, the one she'd never sleep without, the one left behind on her hospital bed 15 years ago. Beside the girl sat an elderly woman, her body frail and bent with age. A faded scarf was tied around her head, exactly as the janitor had described. Her weathered hands rested in her lap, trembling slightly, and her eyes, those eyes seemed to look through them rather than at them, as if focused on some distant memory or dream. "Elsa?" the officer asked gently. The old woman nodded almost imperceptibly, but made no move to stand or speak. The girl pressed herself against the wall, clutching the teddy bear more tightly to her chest. Roberto took a tentative step forward, unable to tear his gaze from the teenager's face. Beneath the fear and confusion, he could see it now, the shape of her eyes, the curve of her chin. Features that had once belonged to a 5-year-old child, now transformed by the passage of years, but unmistakably familiar. "Clara," he whispered, the name feeling both foreign and achingly familiar on his tongue. The girl's eyebrows furrowed. She looked to the elderly woman as if seeking permission or guidance, but Elsa remained lost in her own world, her gaze fixed on something no one else could see. "My name is Maria," the girl finally said, her voice soft and uncertain. "Who are you?" The truth emerged like a cruel dawn, impossible to hold back once the first rays broke through. Detective Alvarez, who had taken over the cold case at Roberto's insistence, sat across from Elsa in the cottage's dim kitchen. The elderly woman's hands trembled as she clutched her faded scarf, her eyes darting between the officers and the teenage girl hiding in the doorway. "I saved her," Elsa whispered, her voice cracking with the weight of her delusion. "My Sophia was gone, taken by the fever, and then I saw this little angel, all alone, crying for her mother." She looked up, tears streaming down her weathered face. "I became her mother. I answered her cries." The detective's recorder captured every devastating word as Elsa described how she had wandered the hospital corridors, mad with grief after losing her own 5-year-old daughter just days before. In her fractured mind, finding Clara alone had seemed like divine intervention, a second chance granted by a merciful God. "I just took her hand," Elsa continued, "and she came with me, so trusting. She held her teddy bear and asked when we were going home." Her eyes glazed over with the memory. "I told her we were going home right then." And we did. For 10 years, Elsa had kept Clara hidden in this remote cottage. No school, no friends, no connection to the outside world beyond occasional trips to distant towns where nobody knew them. She had created elaborate stories about a dangerous world beyond their fence, convincing Clara that isolation was protection. Clara stood frozen in the doorway, her teenage frame thin and awkward, her eyes wide with confusion as her reality collapsed around her. The teddy bear, the only remnant of her true past, clutched tightly against her chest. "She's my mother," Clara insisted, when the officers gently tried to explain. Her voice was soft from years of speaking to no one but Elsa. "You're trying to trick us. She warned me about people who would come to take me away." The psychologist who accompanied the police explained later to Anna and Roberto that Clara's mind had protected itself the only way it could, by accepting Elsa's reality completely. The girl had no memory of her life before the cottage, before Elsa became her entire world. As Elsa was led away, still murmuring about saving her daughter, Clara collapsed into silent tears. The foundation of her existence had crumbled beneath her feet. She wasn't who she thought she was. Her mother wasn't her mother. The stories that had shaped her childhood were elaborate lies spun from one woman's desperate grief. The fragile world Elsa had constructed over a decade of isolation shattered completely in a single afternoon of truth. The reunion took place in a small, sterile conference room at the police station. Anna and Roberto sat rigid with anticipation. Hands clasped so tightly their knuckles whitened. When the door finally opened, the girl who entered was both familiar and a complete stranger. Clara, now 15, stood hesitantly in the doorway, her posture defensive, eyes darting between the unfamiliar faces and the exit. "Clara," Anna whispered, the name catching in her throat like a prayer. She rose slowly, afraid any sudden movement might shatter this fragile moment. Clara clutched her teddy bear, the same one they had identified at the cottage, pressing it against her chest like a shield. Her golden hair, once bouncy curls, now hung straight past her shoulders. The bright eyes Roberto had described countless times to detectives over the years were now wary, assessing the strangers who claimed to be her parents. "My name is Maria," she said quietly, the name Elsa had given her. "They told me you're my real parents." Roberto couldn't speak. Tears streamed down his weathered face as he studied the young woman before him. The daughter whose 5th birthday was the last they'd celebrated, now standing on the cusp of adulthood. 10 years of imagined birthdays, school plays, and bedtime stories collapsed into this single, overwhelming moment. When Anna stepped forward to embrace her, Clara flinched. The social worker had warned them this might happen, but the rejection cut deeper than they could have prepared for. This wasn't the joyful reunion they had dreamed of during countless sleepless nights. The gap between them wasn't just measured in years, but in fundamental trust. "We've missed you every day," Anna said, retreating to give Clara space. "We never stopped looking." Clara nodded politely, but her eyes revealed nothing. The psychologist had explained that Clara's memories before age 5 were fragmented at best. To her, Elsa was the only mother she remembered. The cottage, the only home. These strangers with their desperate eyes and trembling hands were just characters from a story she was now being told was her own. "Would you like to see some photographs?" Roberto finally managed, pulling out a worn envelope from his jacket pocket. "From before." Clara hesitated, then nodded, sitting at the far end of the table. As Roberto spread out snapshots of birthdays, beach trips, and ordinary moments frozen in time, Ina watched their daughter's face for any flicker of recognition. There was none, but Clara studied each image carefully, perhaps searching for herself in the smiling child who shared her face. They wept that night. After Clara had been taken to her temporary placement home, they wept for the years stolen, for the daughter returned to them as a stranger, and for the daunting mountain they now had to climb, rebuilding a relationship from fragments of what once was. Clara sat in the corner of her new bedroom, knees pulled to her chest, the worn teddy bear clutched tightly against her. The walls were painted a soft yellow, her favorite color, they told her, but everything felt alien. She flinched when Anna approached with a brush, her body tensing like a frightened animal. "It's okay, sweetheart," Anna whispered, her voice breaking. "We can try again tomorrow." The first weeks were filled with these small retreats, these careful negotiations of space and touch. Clara would wake screaming in the night, calling for Elsa, the only mother she remembered, While Anna and Roberto stood helplessly in the doorway, their hearts breaking anew with each sob, Dr. Marquez, a child psychologist specializing in trauma, became their lifeline. "She's experiencing a profound identity crisis," he explained during their third session. "Everything she believed about herself has been upended. Your patience is crucial now." Roberto struggled the most with this patience. Once, when Clara refused to eat the dinner Anna had lovingly prepared, he slammed his hand on the table. "You're home now. Why can't you just—" He stopped himself, seeing the terror in Clara's eyes. That night, Anna found him weeping in the garage, clutching an old photograph of their daughter at age 4. "I don't know how to be her father anymore," he confessed. Therapy sessions became the rhythm of their new life. Twice weekly, they sat in Dr. Marquez's office, learning to communicate through art, through stories, through carefully structured activities. Clara rarely spoke directly to them, but slowly began to express herself through drawings, dark, confused images at first, gradually gaining color and form. The teddy bear, which they now knew Clara called Señor Abrazo, or Mr. Hug, became a bridge between worlds. Inna sewed new buttons on his eyes and patched his worn paws, turning the act into a gentle ritual that Clara could observe from a safe distance. Small victories emerged like fragile buds. The first time Clara accepted a goodnight kiss from Anna. The afternoon she asked Roberto about the model ships he built in the basement. The morning they discovered her humming a lullaby Anna used to sing, a melody buried somewhere in her earliest memories. "Recovery isn't linear, Doctor." Marquez reminded them, "There will be setbacks." These came without warning, Clara destroying family photographs, or locking herself in the bathroom for hours, or the day she tried to run away, determined to find Elsa again. Each crisis left them exhausted, questioning whether healing was possible, yet somehow they persisted. Day by day, word by word, they built a new language of family, one that acknowledged the fractures but refused to be defined by them. It wasn't the reunion they had dreamed of for 10 years, but it was theirs, hard-won and honest. Elsa was escorted away by authorities, her grey hair disheveled and her eyes vacant as she clutched at the air where Clara had been. The doctors diagnosed her with severe delusional disorder, exacerbated by decades of untreated grief. She was placed in a psychiatric facility where she spent her days staring out windows, sometimes calling Clara's name, except she used another name. Her own lost daughters. The courts deemed her unfit to stand trial, her mind too fractured to comprehend the magnitude of what she had done or the years she had stolen. The neighborhood that had once buzzed with accusations against Anna and Roberto now fell into an uncomfortable silence. Former friends, who had whispered about parental negligence or even foul play, now averted their eyes when they passed the family on the street. The same gossips who had fed on the tragedy for years now found themselves choking on the truth. "Lock your doors," mothers warned their children. "Watch them every second," they whispered to each other at school gates. Clara's story transformed into an urban legend, a cautionary tale repeated at dinner tables across Chicago. Parents held their children closer in hospital waiting rooms, eyeing strangers with newfound suspicion. Reporters camped outside the family home for weeks. Hungry for details of the reunion, Roberto installed thicker curtains and disconnected the telephone. "They want a miracle story," he told Anna one night, his voice hollow with exhaustion. "They want to hear she remembered us instantly, that everything is fixed." But nothing was fixed. Each morning brought small, heartbreaking reminders of the chasm between them and Clara. She flinched when Anna reached to brush hair from her face. She asked permission before opening the refrigerator. She addressed them formally as Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, the names feeling foreign on her tongue. "She sets an alarm to wake up before us," Anna confided to their therapist. "I found her this morning, sitting perfectly still on the edge of her bed, waiting for permission to use the bathroom." "What kind of life did that woman give her?" The therapist, a kind-eyed woman with patient hands, reminded them that bridges weren't built in days. "Remember, she's grieving too," she explained. In her mind, she's lost a mother. Roberto spent nights reviewing old home movies, searching for clues to reconnect with his daughter. Anna left small gifts outside Clara's bedroom: a hair ribbon, a piece of chocolate, a photograph from before, careful offerings to a skittish stranger who shared their blood. "I keep expecting to feel complete again," Roberto admitted one night as they lay awake. "But it's like we've found her and lost her all at once." Anna squeezed his hand in the darkness. "Then we find her again," she whispered, "however long it takes." Clara stared at the photo album spread across her lap, tracing her finger over images of a little girl she couldn't remember being. The smiling child, with golden curls and bright eyes, was a stranger who happened to share her face. She closed the album with a quiet sigh and placed it on her bedside table. "That's not my birthday," she whispered to herself, referring to the date written beneath one of the photos. "My birthday is in April." But even as she said it, doubt crept in. Elsa had celebrated her birthday in April. Anna and Roberto insisted it was in January. 15 years old and caught between two realities, Clara felt like a visitor in both worlds. The modest house, with its unfamiliar smells and sounds, was supposedly her true home. Yet she found herself longing for the crumbling cottage where she'd spent the last 10 years. She missed Elsa, despite understanding what the woman had done. "Clara, dinner's ready," Anna called from downstairs, her voice gentle but hopeful. Every meal was an exercise in rediscovery. Ina would watch anxiously as Clara took each bite, searching for signs of recognition or pleasure. Sometimes Clara would force a smile just to ease the pain in her mother's eyes. That evening, Anna had prepared rice pudding for dessert. Clara took a spoonful, the sweetness melting on her tongue, and something flickered in the recesses of her mind. A half-formed memory of sitting at this same table, her legs too short to reach the floor, demanding more, please, with sticky fingers. "I used to eat this a lot," Clara said hesitantly. Anna's face brightened. "Every Sunday you would beg for seconds even before finishing your first serving." These moments were becoming more frequent, fragments of her past life emerging like photographs developing in solution. Last week, when Anna had brushed her hair before bed, the gentle strokes had triggered a rush of comfort so profound that Clara had closed her eyes and leaned into the touch. Roberto was more cautious in his approach, afraid of pushing too hard. He would sit in the living room, reading the newspaper, occasionally sharing interesting stories, creating space for Clara to approach on her terms. Yesterday, she had chosen to sit beside him rather than alone by the window. The psychiatrist said this was progress, but Clara still felt adrift. She kept her teddy bear close, the only object that truly belonged to both versions of herself. At night, she would whisper her confusions to it, asking impossible questions. Who am I supposed to be? Which life is real? Sometimes in dreams, the two worlds would merge. Elsa and Anna sitting together at a table, both smiling at her with love. Those were the only moments when Clara felt whole. The seasons changed, and with them, Clara's heart began to thaw. What started as fleeting moments of connection, a shared laugh over breakfast, the recognition of her mother's perfume, gradually became the foundation of something new. Not the relationship that had been stolen, but one built carefully from the rubble of their shared tragedy. Clara kept a journal, filling it with fragments that surfaced unexpectedly. "I remember a yellow dress," she wrote one evening, "and singing in the kitchen while someone, my mother, made bread." Anna wept when Clara showed her the entry, confirming that yes, they had spent countless Sundays baking together when Clara was 4. These small victories sustained them through the harder days when Clara would retreat into herself, overwhelmed by the weight of two competing histories. On those days, she would sit for hours with her teddy bear, running her fingers over its worn fabric, the only constant bridge between her worlds. Anna and Roberto learned patience they never knew they possessed. They discovered that love could take new forms, less desperate, more tender. They stopped trying to reclaim the daughter they had lost, and instead focused on knowing the young woman she had become. "I don't expect her to call me Mama, like she used to," Anna confided to their therapist during a family session. "I'm just grateful when she says my name without flinching." Roberto found connection through teaching Clara to play chess, a game they had started just before her disappearance. His hands trembled the first time he set up the board, but Clara's quiet concentration as she learned the moves became a language they could share without words. The neighborhood that had once whispered behind their backs now watched in respectful silence as the three walked together on Sunday afternoons. Some neighbors, emboldened by time, offered tentative smiles or small gestures of support, a freshly baked cake left on their doorstep, an invitation to a community gathering. Clara's 16th birthday arrived with spring. Instead of the elaborate celebration Anna had initially planned, they honored Clara's request for something small, just the three of them, in the backyard under strung lights. When she blew out her candles, Clara looked up at the stars and then at the two people who had never stopped searching for her. "I don't remember everything," she said softly, "but I'm starting to feel like I belong here. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't whole, but in that moment, with the candle smoke curling into the night air, it was enough." The truth about Clara's disappearance was never the fairy tale ending Anna and Roberto had imagined during those 10 agonizing years of searching. There were no villains to vanquish, no grand conspiracy to unravel, just a broken woman who, in her own fractured way, had loved Clara as fiercely as they did. The reality was messy, painful, and offered no clean resolution. Yet in that complicated truth, they found something unexpected, a testament to the resilience of hope that had kept them searching when everyone else had given up. Clara, now 20, moved through their home with quiet confidence, her steps no longer hesitant. She had chosen to keep both names, Clara from her birth and Elisa from her years with Elsa, a bridge between her divided life. The psychological scars remained, surfacing in nightmares and moments of sudden withdrawal, but they no longer defined her. She had begun university studies in psychology, driven by a desire to understand the human mind that had shaped her unusual journey. Anna and Roberto had aged beyond their years, their faces mapped with lines of grief, transformed slowly into something gentler. They had learned to celebrate the daughter they had now, rather than mourn the one they had lost. The past could never be erased. It lived in police reports, newspaper clippings, and the hollow space of missing years in family photo albums, but it no longer held them captive. They had all three escaped its gravity, step by painful step. Elsa had passed away in a state facility 3 years after Clara's return, never fully comprehending what she had done. Clara had visited her once before the end, a meeting that yielded no dramatic revelations or tearful forgiveness, just quiet acknowledgement of their complicated connection. She had placed a flower by Elsa's bed and left without looking back. In the quiet of their rebuilt home, the battered teddy bear sat on Clara's shelf among textbooks and photographs of new friends. Its worn fur and missing eye had witnessed everything: the hospital room, the lonely cottage, the painful reunion, and finally, healing. It remained a silent reminder of both the darkness they had endured and the light they had fought to reclaim. Some evenings, when the three sat together in comfortable silence, the bear seemed to watch over them, not as a symbol of what was taken, but as proof of what had survived. In its weathered presence, they found an unexpected peace, the understanding that while their story would always be marked by loss, it would never again be defined by it.